wrote about this in Reboot. Milarepa, the great Buddhist saint and teacher, has a song about the inability to separate the waves from the ocean or the wind from the sky, and that they're all actually part of the same experience. And we have to be careful because we do live in a world that wants to encourage us to see the turbulence as a problem that needs to be resolved. We're so oriented to resolution and elimination of discomfort that what I find is how do we ride that wave and not end up drowning in the ocean? How do we exist when, trigger warning, I'm about to curse, I'm from Brooklyn. The world is a shit show. It's a shit show right now. How do we recognize that the world is a shit show and that some 50, 60, 70% of the world feels at threat right now because of our lack of political leadership, because of the challenges, war, famine, climate change, a rise of authoritarianism? All of that is threatening us. And how do we hold on to the fact that the mountains are still beautiful and that both experiences exist? How do we hold ourselves steady, even as we allow ourselves to feel the fear, to feel the turbulence, not to grip ourselves even further and deny that it's existing? Because it's in the feeling of that we empathetically connect with the rest of the world.
2 days ago, I went up to visit my father, as I do every week, and he's 88 years of age, and
God bless him.
He's an incredible physical, mental shape for an 88-year-old man. He really is, but still, as I left him, I felt a tinge of sadness for his evident aging. As I say, he's remarkable for 88, but I can see I can see him. I can see him aging before me, but I also felt a sadness because that was once my home. Was where I lived. 35 years ago or whatever it was, and but the sadness was for him because then it would have been a very full home with my mother, who passed away 15 years ago, with three children. One could say he's very fortunate. His three children still speak to him and live close to him and visit him and all these sort of good things, and he's well and he lives a good life. But I felt a sadness for loneliness or whatever it was. But as I drove away in my car, I just gave myself permission to feel it, because, and I say I gave myself permission, my instinct was, and that's why I'm stating this, because my instinct was not to feel it, to distract myself from that sense of sadness, to, I don't know, switch on the music. My instinct was, even after all these years of practice of meditation, my instinct was not to feel this. And I just said, I kind of just said, no, I need to let myself drop into this experience, because it had a bitter sweetness to it. The sweetness of going, end of the day, he has had an amazing life. He's been successful. He's raised a beautiful family, very, very happy marriage, all of these things. But the impermanence, it inevitably comes to an end, and there's sadness with that. But that's not easy. At least I say it's not easy. Obviously, I'm speaking for myself, but I imagine it's not easy for most people to feel those moments that are inevitable. And I suppose also I'm aware maybe I will be there myself someday.
Well, first of all, when you started to speak and tell this story, one of the things that occurred to me was to recall the bittersweetness of impermanence. And that's what you're speaking to. And what I really admire is that you allowed yourself to experience the totality of it. The exquisite bitterness exists because of the sweetness, because you had a chance to sit with your father. And so I actually think that allowing yourself to experience the fullness of that experience is what I would refer to as the joy of impermanence. Now, let me explain what I mean. A few months back, one of my dearest teachers, Parker Palmer, and I were invited to be in conversation on a podcast called The Courageous Life by a good mutual friend named Joshua Steinfeld. And it didn't quite happen this way, but the way I remember it was Joshua just said to these two old guys, Jerry and Parker, impermanence. And we just started talking. And I mentioned all that you had just said and ended up with the joy of impermanence. And what I was talking about was what you got to in the very end of what you were saying, in which you said, I'm just speaking for myself. I think other people would feel something similar. But I'm going to assure you that everybody feels the bittersweetness of impermanence. And it's in the fact that everyone feels the bittersweetness of impermanence. That's where the joy of impermanence lies. Because those folks who are hearing you tell of that little experience last week, they're doing exactly what I did. They're brought back to a relationship that matters to them. They're feeling both edges of that, the sadness of someone who may have passed and the joy of having been with them. And in feeling the bittersweetness of that impermanence, you gave a gift to me, to everyone else, which is where the joy lies. Because that's what connects us. Watch this for a moment. Your father, back when he was a young man, experienced the bittersweetness of impermanence when his ancestors passed, didn't he?
Of course.
And their ancestors, those ancestors, your ancestors, felt that experience. So now, as we just sort of pause and hold on to the tears of that, you get to remember. Perhaps your ancestors survived the famine. Perhaps they walked the famine roads. And you get to feel them. Perhaps they journeyed through the Declaration of Independence. You know, yours, not the American one.
Sure.
And all of that. And notice what you're feeling even in this moment. That's connection. That's reunion. That's what I wrote about in my second book. That sense of connectedness. Perhaps you have an ancestor who went through the diaspora, maybe was transported. And all of a sudden, you're now connected to literally millions of kinfolk around the world because you didn't switch on the radio. You felt what you felt.
I think with two thoughts strike me as you're saying that. And yes, probably in having this discussion, somebody may listen to it and connect with it, as you say, because it connects them with their own feelings. But no doubt the awareness that came to me in that moment is because I heard it from someone else at some stage, at some stage in teaching or listening or whatever. I've heard probably on many occasions how to be with that moment. And so I was able to, so we passed that gift on to those listening. But the other thing that strikes me is when you have that feeling, because you then recognize that every human being has the same experience if they're willing to acknowledge it. For me, it brings with it a sense of connection, certainly, but a desire for kindness because you know that no matter who you're standing in front of, no matter what their expression, no matter what they say to you, no matter what the situation is, you know ultimately we are connected by this life that is both beautiful and challenging. And for me, that encourages kindness.
I mean, that is the thesis of my second book, right there, right in there. You know, the subplot is, among other things, I journey back to Ireland. My father found out when he was 21 that he had been adopted by an Italian American couple. His biological mother, his birth mother, was an Irish immigrant to New York. And in 2022, I visited her grave. And as I said at the time, I walked amongst the bones of my kinfolk.
Mm.
And it's in the leaning into the bitterness that I had to experience because it was hard to imagine not only the grandmother I knew who in a fit of anger hurled the fact that my father had been adopted at him on his wedding day. She was so angry at him
Mm.
for marrying my mother. She told him that you're not my son. But the bitterness that I felt towards the woman who had given up my father at 18 months old, and the realization that by embracing those complicated sets of feelings, all of a sudden I could see a young, scared 20-year-old immigrant in New York not knowing what to do. I could see her as kinfolk.
Mm.
And through that experience, imagine in this sort of heart-opening bodhicitta way, all of the people who are struggling. Imagining, for example, an immigrant mother from Guatemala trying to make her way, legally or not, across the southern border of the United States and realize a connectedness in that experience, as you put it so well, the entirety of the experience of being human, of wanting a better life for a child, of sacrificing things, of taking on the pain of giving up a child. That's not an easy task to do. And wow, doesn't that bind us all together? Makes it really, really hard to dehumanize someone when you see them as kinfolk. Even though there are so many forces at play right now that would have us systemically other and demonize another person for who they love, for how they worship, for whether or not they worship.
Mm.
For Christ's sake, for their humanity, they are othered.
You talk a lot about radical self-inquiry, and it makes me think that the more we, well, maybe you can explain for people what radical self-inquiry is, but what it makes me think is the more we do that self-inquiry and we look into our own heart, soul, whatever you want to call it, as you say, it's very I won't say it's very difficult, you become less inclined to feel that separation from other people, because the more you look inside and see yourself, the more you realize that you're the same as everyone else. No matter
You
who they
just
are, no
said
matter
it.
what they look like, no matter what their preferences are.
The, that's right. To be clear, there are really important differences between us, but those differences don't have to separate us.
Mm.
It's the shared humanity that binds us together. I remember during the worst of the pandemic having this insight. I was doing a virtual call, a support call, really, with a bunch of entrepreneurs in Mumbai. And everybody gets on the phone, and just, it's like 50 people in a Zoom call. We've all had those little mini boxes, right? And I was talking about the experience of wearing a mask, which, for heaven's sake, was so polarizing, so crazy making. And yet, what I saw in that mask was a symbol of our ability to unite. Because, see, I wear a mask to prevent the spread of a virus that might affect somebody in Mumbai. So I need them to wear a mask so somebody like your father, who might have been challenged, doesn't get sick and die.
Mm.
And what a brilliant notion, what a brilliant symbol of our interdependence and interconnectedness, despite the differences that exist between us. Because we do have different experiences, and those should be celebrated, not cause for segmentation or separation.
But segmentation, separation, violence, war, discrimination, racism, all of these things have always been with us. Maybe we think they're more prevalent. Maybe they are more prevalent now. I don't know, but I seriously doubt it. We're more aware of them now because the news is in our pocket. We carry it everywhere, and we're inundated with this information. But for some reason, it just seems to be the nature of humanity that, as I read history, I don't see how it has changed in thousands of years.
I think that that's absolutely true. I mean, and first of all, you're in your 50s, 60s. How old are you?
I'm 60 next week.
Oh, mazel tov, mazel tov. I'll be 62 this year, so I'm just a tad older.
Just a
So
little.
you grew up in the Troubles,
Absolutely.
okay? So you have a visceral, felt sense for what it's like for people to be murdered for how they worship, all in the name of religion. Okay. So you get to speak on this issue, you and your kinfolk. And I think you're right. When I was writing Reunion, I remember there was a chapter. We just had another mass shooting, another school shooting here. I remember writing during the summer. I don't know if you remember. There's so many school shootings in the United States. It's kind of hard to keep them all straight. But this was the shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And I remember writing in the opening of a chapter, they've not yet finished burying the babies in Uvalde, Texas. See, this kind of violence is the natural outgrowth of dehumanization, of systemic othering, of not seeing kinfolk in the other's experience, of not seeing that which binds us together, seeing only the differences, if you will. And leaning into that experience, I think you're right. There is something about our experience of being human that where we naturally turn towards fearing those outside of our tribe, however we define the tribe.
Mm.
And our task, though, is to overcome those primal instincts. Our task is to listen to the elders who have come before us. There is no wisdom tradition. There is no religious tradition that says murder other people, despite the way we interpret documents. Okay. And so I think of, for example, when I'm reaching for the poem right now, when I was writing Reunion, the Buddhist teacher and poet Bell Hooks passed away. And I started rereading her work, and I came across this poem. And it's from a collection of poems by the same title of this book, this poem. She wrote, "When angels speak of love, they tell us all is union and reunion. When angels speak of love, they tell us all is union and reunion. Dying, reborn again, there is no separation, no end to paradise. We are always present, the ecstatic moving us along each current, each wilderness of spirit, a dedicated path." Bell Hooks. I think the task is for us to listen to angels speak of love. I think we forget again and again and again that what we are supposed to do is listen for the angels speaking of love, because they tell us that all things are union and reunion. And there's this hopelessness that can set in, a nihilism that can set in. Okay, so I listened and I loved, and yet babies are still shot.
Mm.
Or I listen and I still love, and immigrants are still demonized. Rabbi Tarfon, one of the great teachers of the rabbinic tradition in Judaism, has this teaching, and he said, "It is not yours to complete the work, but neither are you at liberty to ignore the work."
Mm.
And I think implicit in that is, yes, it is the human condition that we fear the other, so much so that we will strive to demonize them and wipe them out. But we have to try to overcome that anyway, because we're not at liberty to neglect the work.
Mm.
We have to do this again and again and again. And the last thing I say, and it all roots back to what you said before, the radical self-inquiry. Who am I? How am I organized? What do I believe to be true about the world? And how does that connect back to that larger question?